Light as a feather, stiff as a board. Light as a feather, stiff as a board.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Black as night, erase death from our sight. White as light, mighty hectate make it right.
I myself am strange and unusual.
Cast your circle, spark some incense, and grab a cup of tea because it's time for the Cousins Coven podcast. I'm Sharon.
And this is Wendy. Welcome back to the Coven, you guys. We're so happy to have you here.
Yes, welcome to the Coven. If you're new, we're just two cousins who talk about the metaphysical and the paranormal. And today our main topic is going to be time slips. But first, I know we have some updates and a few side stories to get into. So let's start with some Patreon thank yous. So it really means a lot to us to be welcoming Liz and JP to our Patreon community. Thank you so much. And thanks for the messages and the shout outs and everything that you've been sending our way and the love. We thank you so much.
Yes, we're super excited to have you on board. And on our after show today, we're going to answer some emails that you sent in.
Yes, so look forward to that, guys.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up too that just kind of as a reminder, we have a YouTube. It's always linked in our episode bio, so make sure to check that out. So basically, our YouTube is just old episodes. It's episodes that we've archived. I'm trying to get it caught up. I'm working really hard because we have to create the art and create the video. And Sharon and I are just two cousins doing all this on our own. We don't have anybody who works for us. So
yeah, it's been a lot of learning just by doing. So we're not experts by any means, but yeah, so that's available to you guys. And that's, I think, the one place where almost all of our episodes are on one platform, which is nice.
Yes. Yeah. So if you are a new listener or even you've been listening for a while, but you haven't been able to catch up on all the episodes, you can always check it out on YouTube. They're there just for you to use.
Yes.
Let's see. I had an update on the Roanoke colony. So I know when we first started doing podcasts, we did talk about Roanoke.
We had a whole episode on Roanoke, but maybe some people don't know, just in case.
Yeah.
What Roanoke is. Yeah, do you want to break that down?
So Roanoke is a colony from the 1500s that was there and then disappeared. And so it's always been kind of this wonder what happened to them. They blamed it on the Croatoan, which in a lot of stories that you hear, like from maybe the TV show Supernatural or other things, that this virus came in or this black ooze or something came in and killed them, or they were abducted, or there's all these theories of what could have happened to them.
Right. Fled and mixed with the Native American tribes is another theory.
Right.
Zombie apocalypse was another theory. Aliens.
Yes. Yeah. All sorts of things.
What is your update on like their whereabouts or what happened to them?
Yes. So there have been several archaeological digs trying to find out what happened to this group of people. And they did find that they survived. So they didn't die out. What happened was, and they're not sure the minute details, like what made them leave where they were, the Roanoke Island, to go to somewhere else. But they did pick up everything that they had and they moved to a place called Hatteras Island, which is literally just another island in that same strand off of North Carolina.
And how did they figure this out?
They followed their pattern. Like they were able to go from the island and see where they camped by finding archaeological items such as plates, cups.
What? And it took us this long to do this?
Yeah. Yeah. But now we have archaeological equipment that we didn't have before.
Maybe like the scanning and things like that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And more people working together. So different groups working together to try to find out what really happened to them. So they do believe that they found their initial campsite from when they left the island. And they've been unearthing that for a few months now. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what caused them to leave the island, if maybe they can find that out, or maybe they'll find some written information from them. I don't know. Who knows what they'll find?
So it did look like they all traveled together?
Yes. Yeah. They all
Migrated,
traveled.
basically?
Yep. They migrated.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I'm a little disappointed, but I'm glad that they're alive at the same time.
Right. Nothing paranormal.
Exactly. That's what it is.
My gosh. That's not fair. We wanted it to be paranormal.
I know. I wanted there to be trace evidence of UFOs or something.
Exactly.
But that's still cool that you found that. I probably would have never heard about the update and kept on wondering. So you know what? You satiated that great mystery.
Thanks. Yeah.
We didn't have too much off the top. Should we just get into our main discussion today?
I think so. Yeah, I don't really have anything.
Yeah, I didn't scour the news myself. So let's just get into it. I know that time slips is something we've both kind of dabbled in talking about, wanted to talk about. So I find it to be a really fun topic. Like, it's just one of those ones that I don't ever really take that seriously. And I just, like, when I hear someone mention it, I'm like, oh, well, what's the folklore on that? Or what's the photo that makes us think that this person was a time traveler with a cell phone? Like, I just get really into the lore of it. I like the idea of it, but I don't know if it's real or not. What are your thoughts on time slips and what they are, I guess?
I guess what I think a time slip is, I mean, we'll talk about our theories afterwards. I don't want to talk about my personal theories yet.
Yeah.
But a time slip is just like what you're saying. It's something that either someone travels back in time or forward in time. And it's usually an individual or a group of individuals who experiences something at the same time. So you're right. We've talked about time slips just a little bit in and out of different episodes. We talked about it in the Mandela Effect episode we had. The thought of time traveling scientifically, I think that they know that it exists in some way, shape, or form. I feel like. Mm-hmm. So I think aside from it being like the use of a time machine, I don't know.
Right? Because it's so weird, because the idea, even the name itself, time slips. It's like suggesting that someone is going seamlessly about their day, just walking, and all of a sudden the surroundings are different.
Right.
And a lot of these cases, it seems like they're not even seeing a structure that they're familiar with, like if that structure wasn't built yet in their time and things like that.
Right.
And then they just like slip back out. So no one's like intending for these time slips to happen. It's all just by accident.
Right.
And I know for the story that I kind of dug into, it had more than one individual, which I feel like does kind of help the story, because you have someone to try to corroborate and then try to like put it together to see if it matches. So it's really interesting when time slips are happening to more than just one person.
Right. Yeah, very much so. So do you want to dig into your story or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I've only heard about this like maybe like a year ago. And then ever since, it's just kind of really captured my imagination, because it just sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz, where you just like stumble across some sort of fantasy elements that you're not even intending to. So it's one of the earliest and most famous, I guess, cases of time slips. It's known as the Ghost of Versailles. And it's these two women who kind of claim to have experienced time travel and hauntings. And it was two reputable English women who were actually principals. It's Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain are their names. And this took place in the summer of 1901. And they ended up actually writing a book in 1911 called An Adventure under the names of Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamont. So they did not want to be associated with the book. They did not want to ruin their reputations as principals and academic people, but they were so like called to get their story of basically time travel out to the world. So kind of everything that I'll be sharing from you comes from that book and the aftermath thereof. So the book describes that they made a visit to one of the small chateaux outside of the Versailles gardens, kind of where Marie Antoinette would like hang out and have her infamous like affairs, like her little love shack, basically. And they were going about the gardens when they basically got transported back into the French Revolution, which is the late 18th century. And they even claimed to come across the ghost of Marie Antoinette herself. The story caused a big sensation, and they were actually subject to a lot of ridicule, which is kind of sad, but it makes sense because time travel is such a large claim. Like, who could really believe time travel unless you've been through it?
Right.
But the ladies in their book, they talk about how they were kind of bored of the main palace, so they went outside to go look at some of these smaller chateaus and stuff, and they even had a guidebook, but they just missed one of their turns, and they completely got lost, and they ended up bypassing their entire destination, and they're walking down a path, and the woman Charlotte, she notices that there is a woman shaking like a white cloth out her window, like she's just like shaking out the dust or whatever. And then Eleanor sees an old deserted farmhouse and a really, really old plow just outside. And they keep walking and they get this feeling of oppression and dreariness just like coming over them. And they just kind of have a really weird dreamlike walk as they continue down these garden lanes trying to figure out where they're at. And they come across two men. And they look like palace gardeners who actually ended up helping them try to figure out where to go to find the chateau. And they're like, here, just go straight on. And Charlotte describes them as being really dignified officials, and they were dressed in these long grayish coats, and they had that small, like, three-cornered hats going on. So, like, really out of time, you know? And then Eleanor noticed a cottage, and there was a small woman holding a jug out to a girl standing in the doorway. And their description of this event still kind of confuses me because they describe it as the scene being somewhat frozen in time. And Eleanor describes it as being like a living picture that she compared to the wax works of like Madame Tussauds. And so I was wondering, does that just mean that they were walking past and those two women were literally frozen and not moving? You know?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Really, really weird.
Mm-hmm.
And then Charlotte just kind of remembers feeling a shift in the atmosphere. And they, in the book, they write, everything suddenly looked unnatural, therefore unpleasant. Even the trees seemed to become flat and lifeless, like wood worked in tapestry. There were no effects of light and shade, and no wind stirred the trees. And then they finally reached a place close to Marie Antoinette's area, and they come across a man who was just sitting in the garden. And he was, again, just appeared in a period dress, and he had a cloak and a large hat. He was a little rough in appearance, pockmarked face. He had a very dark expression, wearing a floppy hat and a large cloak. And Eleanor admitted that he repulsed her, just something about him. And the two men decided they didn't even want to walk past him. And then a more pleasant man with curly hair approached them and showed them the way to the place. And Charlotte said she noticed that there was a lady sitting on the grass. She kind of looked up at them as they crossed a bridge to reach the gardens in front of the little palace. And the lady was wearing a light summer dress. She had a shady white hat with lots of fair hair. And at first I thought maybe she was just a tourist, but she was also like dressed in old-fashioned clothing. And afterwards, when they kind of processed it all and put the pieces together, they're like, oh shit, that was Marie Antoinette.
Whoa.
Yeah. And neither of them could really let this event go, or the strangeness of the events go. But like the day of, they didn't really talk about it out loud. They kind of just walked through and then eventually just joined by modern day tourists in a different building, and then just went about like nothing odd had happened. And it wasn't for a while afterwards that they kind of ended up talking about it. This could be because both of them come from like conservative English families. They could have been shocked by the events, or kind of even afraid to tarnish their name, is what a lot of people are saying. Because these events at that time were actually considered controversial and scandalous.
Right.
So,
especially when you bring religion into it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
You couldn't just be open about like, whoa, this thing happened to me. Like they just kind of like buried it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how the silence got broken, but thank God it did. So they decided to discuss it. But before going into detail, being the smart principals and academics that they were, they're like, look, you write down what happened on your paper. I'm going to write down what happened on my paper. And afterwards, let's compare. And so when they did that, I guess their stories matched, and this kind of led them down an obsession and a rabbit hole. They start looking into paintings from the area, and they're actually able to discover that that man that they saw in the gardens looked like this guy named the Comte de Uriel. That's butchering it. So sorry, guys. He was the lover of Marie Antoinette's best friend. And a really close companion to the queen. But the only difference that they saw in the painting was the guy in the painting was white, basically. But the guy that they walked past in the gardens had dark skin. But apparently, historically, this is what they would do because that was the style and or air quotes fashion of the era to basically depict darker people as white, aka whitewashing.
That's dumb.
Right. Dumb. But they didn't know this at the time. So they're just like, hey, this looks like this guy, but he's white. But when you look at it historically, that guy was actually a darker complected man. Just the painter painted him white. He was born in the West Indies and had a Creole mother and a very dark complexion. So the women didn't know that when they discovered the painting, but it kind of just tied into what they had witnessed. And then over the years that followed, they had actually returned to France. They visited the gardens several times, and they were never able to retrace that exact path that they took. And even various landmarks that they experienced that day, like they walked past a garden kiosk, they walked across a bridge, those were missing. And every time they went back into similar, I guess, areas to just try to figure it out, it was just full of tourists. So I feel like that's probably how it is to this day, just full of tourists everywhere. You wouldn't have a private moment like they did. And they kept trying to come up with an explanation. They wondered if they had come across like a private party or a blocked like event for that day. They looked into it. There was nothing booked. They thought they might have seen events that actually took place on August 10th of 1792. They actually started putting it together like we were there on the 10th of 1901, I think. And they're thinking they got transported to August 10th, 1792, which was 6 weeks before the abolition of the French monarchy, when the whole palace in Paris was besieged and the King's Swiss Guards were massacred. So they're thinking they got transported to an innocent time right before all this chaos happened. They were convinced that the grounds were haunted. So they themselves would use the words haunted to describe it. I don't think they ever said the word time slip. They just feel like it was the ghost from that era. And then they decided to publish their story, obviously, in 1911. And they were ridiculed, regardless of the fact that they were really reliable sources. They were well educated. Obviously, they were the principals. They were principals at college in Oxford. And a lot of critics just kind of came at them saying that the whole story was not only implausible, but they complained that it was inconsistent depending on what publishing of the book you're looking at. And different organizations actually attempted to discredit their account as some kind of female hysteria.
Of course.
More specifically, one explanation that got really labeled to them is that they shared they had a shared psychosis that was transferred through their lesbian relationship. So they have some sort of lesbian time traveling powers, psychosis. I'm like, sign me up to be a lesbian if we're going to be able to have time traveling powers. Right.
I'm going to ask all of my friends.
Yeah. Exactly.
Do you guys time travel together?
Or have like weird shared psychoses from kissing? Clearly being a lesbian doesn't have that effect. No. But that was kind of one label that followed them around. I don't know if they actually were partners. I didn't research that, so they may have been partners. They may have not been partners. I'm not sure.
Right.
But another theory that kind of gets chalked up to this weird basically because there was an LGBTQ involvement, potentially, it got just kind of blamed on that again. It's just such a weird explanation. But essentially, they're like, well, maybe it was this weird drag queen party that was going on because there was a French artist, Robert de Montesquieu, who lived nearby. And there was a biographer, Philip Julian, who noted that the artist would have been in his house at Versailles and was noted for having performances in which these gay Parisian men would come over and dress as men and women. And they're just like, oh, that's it. That Marie Antoinette they saw, that was one of those Parisian men. And that's why it was so off, because it was transvestite. And it's just like, no, I don't think that just because there was a guy who's known for having, parties with drag queens, essentially.
Yeah, it wouldn't explain the fact that those people were frozen in time, that they had an eerie feeling.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it would have had an atmosphere of a party or a performance, but people were just chilling.
Right.
So I just thought that was really bizarre that those are the two main explanations that about of the time that came out.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, and there was no evidence of that guy ever throwing a party in 1901. So again, it was just kind of hearsay, and then that kind of just went on and on and on down in history, being rewritten as explanation. Like, it was just the Marie Antoinette transvestite that they thought was a ghost. No, it's not even true. So if you hear that, I would say it's not even true.
Yeah.
So yeah, they did end up getting discredited, and somehow it got tied to them, I guess. I think it came out after maybe one of them passed that it was really, really them. And one of the girls kind of had more paranormal experiences. I believe it was Charlotte throughout her life, and she enjoyed it, where Eleanor was kind of didn't ever enjoy being associated with it, didn't ever want this. So it's really interesting to see how together they witnessed that, and I kind of believe it. Like, I don't feel like it was just people in costumes,
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I feel like this is one of the larger time slip stories. Like, this is the most common one that you find.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't. There's just so many things, like, all because of the time period. I'm just floored right now thinking that just because they're women, just because they potentially loved each other, just because there was that.
Yeah, just because there was some Persian men in dresses.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. No.
Yeah, it is weird. It leaves a lot of questions. There's people who think, well, before this story came out, there was that story, the Time Machine. Was that H.G. Wells or something like that? And they're like, did they just get inspired by that? And if that was the case, I think the two women would have just like come together to write fiction. And
they would have written more than just right.
Yeah. But it sounds like something that it's like the idea of them getting super sucked into it, looking at the paintings and trying to piece together what time they were in, and then realizing, oh my God, that was Marie Antoinette. Like, that just seems like such a crazy time for them to be going through. And I can so relate to being sucked down a rabbit hole.
Right. We were doing it then and we're still doing it now. Yeah. I find it, that whole thing that they described it as being that they were just basically looking at a picture. That's what really gets me. Usually with a haunting, you wouldn't have that effect. You'd see it playing out. But the thought that they looked like they were looking at a picture, like they were partially there, but not really there.
Right, and the way that like light wasn't reflecting properly and there was no breeze. And then other times they were able to ask for directions from two men. So whatever was going on, it wasn't like it was a time slip where time wasn't going in standard sense. Like, it seemed like it froze for a little bit and then it was interactive. So that's also another thing where it's not just a ghost haunting playing on repeat. Like, it was able to give them directions.
Right. I'm like, I have a theory on this one.
Okay.
Just bear with me here. What if they weren't going into the past, but rather into the future, and holograms were a thing? What if they were looking at a hologram? Because a hologram could interact with you. Yeah.
So where are you saying this hologram was coming from?
Maybe the future.
The future.
Like, what if in the future they create an interactive exhibit there? In that space.
That's a fun theory.
Right? I know it's really out there, but what if?
And they're like, we're going to put this intimidating man to give directions. And if you're brave enough to ask him, he will tell you where to go. It's a good theory. That would be so crazy to experience that. I'm trying to think of like time travel slips where you're just like so out of date where you don't know like what an amusement park ride would look like. But then again, they did compare it to Madame Tussauds. So that would be really cool if it was just some weird time slip of an
Right.
amusement type situation.
Mm-hmm.
But that can't explain all of them.
No,
Because there's
not at
more
all.
than just this case, and they seem to just happen randomly. Like, I don't know if they're tied to tragic events, but or tied to the individuals who are experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is your case that you kind of looked into?
Oh, so I came across this guy named Sir Victor Goddard. So he was an air marshal for the Royal Air Force, like in World War I and World War II. And so when I talk about this story, I just needed to point that out because they consider him to be a credible source. At the time they didn't, but now in the world that we live in today, we consider him to be a credible source.
That seems to be the common trend whenever we do witness testimonies in the paranormal. We have to like, this is their job, therefore they're credible. Like, that's just how we do it here in our world.
Yeah, it's how we validate the story, I suppose. So he was on a mission in 1935 and he was traveling. He was a pilot. So he was traveling from Scotland to England. And along the way, he flew over kind of this small little village called Drem, which is in Scotland, just outside of Edinburgh. And in that place, there's an airstrip that was abandoned. And so as he was flying over, he was looking down and he was noticing the dilapidated buildings and cattle was everywhere. There were other farm animals. And he was just thinking how sad it was that, because he'd been there before in World War I and was sad to see this airstrip, dilapidated, basically. So he made it to his destination, he did his thing, and then he had to fly back from where he came from. So he left England, went back to Scotland. And on his way, he flew into like this bank of clouds and it ended up being a huge storm. So his equipment malfunctioned. There was huge rain, lots of lightning. So he was like, I've got to get out of the storm. I don't want to crash, So he got up above the clouds. He went way up into the clouds, was flying really fast, trying to get out of the storm and get past the storm, and came out and was all of a sudden into the sun and realized he was flying over the airfield. So he was like, you know what, I'm going to fly down there and land and wait for the storm to pass. So he landed and he got off his plane, and in one of the hangars, he saw a bright yellow airplane, a plane that he had never seen before. He knew all of the Royal Army's airplanes because he worked in the Air Force. And he was like, what is this? What could this possibly be? And then he noticed there were all these people on the airfield, that it wasn't dilapidated anymore, that the buildings were all fixed. And he looked around and he noticed they were all wearing blue uniforms. Like the Royal Air Force at the time wore brown uniforms. And so he was like, why are these people wearing blue uniforms? They're not even dressed appropriately. And so he was just thinking, what's going on here? This is really strange. I wasn't informed that there were changes going on. What's happening?
Right. That was his cue to something was off.
Yeah. He was like, whoa, this is crazy. And I found two different types of stories. Like I found stories that said he interacted with the individuals that were there, and some stories that said he didn't interact with anyone there. I like to go with the story that he interacted with them. And
yeah, what's the interaction?
Yeah, it was basically, hey, there was a storm. I came down here to land, that kind of thing. I'm going to take off here in a moment. So, after he was done kind of looking around, he just got back into his plane and flew back to his original destination. And he immediately afterwards went to the bar and was kind of telling his pilot friends about the story, and they all laughed at him, just discrediting the fact that he had a story. They asked him if he was drunk while he was flying. They asked him if he hit his head. They were like, you couldn't have possibly seen that.
I think hitting your head is it might come across as insulting, but it's kind of like, well, let's just go for the reality-based questions. Did you have any head trauma to make you see something weird? It's kind of
Right?
legit question to ask.
I know. It's so funny though. Like, just imagine like being this dude. He's like, no, I'm being truthful. I'm telling you a story. And they're like, you're lying.
Yeah, I feel sorry for any time traveler. It kind of reminds me of like Kyle Reese in The Terminator when he's just flipping shit in the police officer's like office and he's like, I'm telling you, your whole world's gonna die. And like no one believes him.
Right.
It's not easy going through a time slip.
Right.
No one will believe you. I think that's the main lesson, main takeaway of today's episode.
No one's going to believe you.
No
Yeah.
one, except for us here in the Coven.
Right. Right. So 4 years later, in 1939, Mr. Goddard, he had to go to this kind of Royal Air Force training. And while he was there, they unveiled a new plane that was bright yellow, exactly like the one he had seen at the Drum Air Force Airfield Space. At that time, he was also briefed that the Royal Army were getting new uniforms and that they were going to be blue, and that they were going to reopen the Drum Airfield Space, refurbish everything so that it could be used again because of World War II. So he thinks that he slipped into the future and just briefly was given a glimpse of things to come. And what was strange about him, and that I didn't come across this until literally like minutes before we started recording, but apparently this happened to him again.
What?
Yeah, he said that he had a dream this time that he was going to be flying and the ice would land onto his plane, and that he would be like in Tokyo or somewhere like that, having to take people back and forth, and that when the ice got on the plane, it froze the plane and then made them crash. Well, there did come a point in time, a few years after he had that dream, where he was asked to take some people up into a plane and transport them in Tokyo to another location in Japan. And so as he was flying, he really did get into an ice storm and it locked up all of his equipment, and they ended up having to do an emergency landing. Now, in his dream, they all died, but in reality, he was able to maneuver well enough for them to land and no one was hurt.
Wow, good for him.
Right? But it's crazy that he had both of those, and it made me think maybe he was psychic.
Yeah, he's like an open individual and channeling something. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And honestly, one link between a lot of these tales is war. There was some sort of trauma, and that's causing a wave of vibration throughout history and time. Like, I had another story I kind of wanted to share that's small, if you're done with this, guys.
Sure. Yeah,
but it kind of made me think of it as like there was this journalist who experienced an air raid 11 years before it actually occurred. And so kind of like you said, yours was from the future, right? So this is like very, very similar. There was a journalist, J. Bernard Hutton, and a photographer, Joachim Brandt. They were sent by a German newspaper to do a story on the Hamburg shipyard in 1932. And it was a really uneventful visit. And that is until they actually experienced bombs raining down on them. The two journalists realized they were caught in the middle of an air raid and hightailed out of there. But they did snap some photos. But when they got back to the center of Hamburg, no one believed their story. No one had heard anything on the news. So the journalists developed their photos, trying to prove what they had seen. But the actual opposite happened. The photos showed no signs of an air raid whatsoever. Everything looked like nothing was disturbed. And then 11 years later, Bernard Hutton, the photographer, no, he was the journalist, I'm sorry. The journalist who was living in London, he opened up a newspaper and he saw what had happened. And it brought him back to that event. And what he had actually experienced was the bombing. And so that just really makes me think of how you're explaining the ship and how war is a major trauma and people are experiencing it. And it's just super creeping me out.
Right? It's kind of like when we had our very first podcast episode and we talked about that Battle of Nuremberg.
Oh my God, you're so right. It's like, it is full circle because that was the theory then that the flying craft that they were like writing about on these ancient woodcuts, There was no
Mm-hmm.
technology of any kind of flying anything. And so some people say aliens, some people say it. You said, I think, it was just this battle time slipping over. And at the time, I
Yeah.
felt like that concept to me was so out there. I was like, wow. I called it like a Wendy's what if.
Yeah, exactly.
I've come so far to just be discussing it here, and like it still shocks me and scares me. But it's kind of like a common thing with the paranormal or tragedies, the Mothman, the bridge,
Mm-hmm.
with aliens showing up whenever we're testing nuclear warheads and things like that.
Right.
There's this
right.
weird link to the paranormal. It's like, what are we as humans in our destruction? What are we causing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just have to go back to that whole time isn't linear thing. You know, I really fully believe that we don't move in one fluid forward motion. We
Mm-hmm.
can go back and forth depending on what type of spiritual place we're in or what time of where our consciousness is at. And so I think that anything's possible, really.
Yeah, it's like this whole time travel thing. You're talking about how time travels. I've heard the theory that time is like you said, a circle. But what if it's like that cosmic spiral, and like all these little spirals
Mm-hmm.
can somehow, they're going downward and they're intersecting and intertwining. It's just
Mm-hmm.
really, really weird. I don't know if I'm strong enough to experience a time slip. Can you imagine what it would be like to have to go through time? First of all, I'd be like shitting my pants. I would love it if I was with the right person, if I was with you or someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And then we could come back and just have that shared experience. But I just feel like it could also really fuck with you mentally. It could destroy relationships, your credibility.
Right. Make you go crazy.
Yeah, doubt your reality.
Right. Right. I mean, I think if I weren't going into a war, like let's say
Yeah, an
instead
air
of in my-
raid.
Yeah. I'm like, let's say I'm in my house and then all of a sudden I'm put back into the early thousands before there was any life, you know, human life right in the place where my house was. I'd probably be okay with that. You know, I'm just floating around, you know, looking around and running through a field. That'd be great.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know if I'd want to. The thought of any sort of war going on would terrify me. But both the stories that we told, they didn't see, you know, war in Versailles. They were just seeing people, just pictures, really.
Right. And it was like, okay, in the end, the women linked it to the tragedy, obviously, themselves, but they weren't witnessing the tragedy. So that is kind of nice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be all war.
Right.
Upon Googling time slips, I don't know if this happened to you, but this happened to me, where a lot of the people who are writing about it are people who are experiencing it. So I came across multiple people who were like, I'm going to talk to you about the Versailles, but at the end, I'm going to tell you what happened to me. And I was like loving it. So one of them, I kind of just thought it was short enough and different enough that I thought it was worth mentioning. So this is just based on one blogger's account. We'll link it down below. They say, one day I was writing at the table in the entrance hall. My mother walked through and looked at me. What she saw made her pause. As she tells it, I sat writing. Only my long, straight black hair had become ringlets. My Independence Day t-shirt had become a black dress with a wide white collar. A few moments later, I went back to normal. And what's especially weird is that she continued talking to me throughout. That just sounds like a good mom right there.
Yeah.
My mother is not prone to flights of fancy. So did she experience a time slip to an earlier version of our cottage? Or even weirder, did she find a time slip that showed an earlier version of me? So they thought maybe like a reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they think,
or
go ahead.
Or something that was to come.
I guess it was the clothes that in their mind they're period, but like in our mind that's like, hey, you just want to do like a Wednesday Adam look kind of thing.
Right.
But I thought the idea of them trying to tie in reincarnation to explain time slips was kind of interesting.
That is. I haven't heard that one, so that's very interesting.
Yeah, like that sounds like something that would happen to you and your kids, to be quite frank, where you would just walk in and you walk in and they're in some sort of like other period clothing eating cereal. Like I could just see you telling me that and I'd be like, what?
Yeah. I feel like I've experienced time slips before, and I think I've pretty much talked about all of them on podcasts. So
I think you have, yeah.
And
they are kind of paranormal.
They are kind of paranormal, that's for sure. So let's talk about what we think these are. What do you think they really are?
I felt bad like I cut you off. What were we going to say about your past experiences?
Nothing.
Okay, if you guys want to know, you're going to have to go back and listen to old episodes.
Yeah.
Okay, what were you going to ask me? I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So I was just going to say that let's talk about what these time slips are. What do you think they are? Yeah, let's talk about theories.
Okay, let's just stick with the ghost things, I guess.
Right.
So, one person I was reading to notice that like ghosts, they kind of are like time lords. Like they are known for like slipping in and out of time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm,
but then time slips is the one time that it feels like humans are the ones going through time because the locations are also changing for a lot of these stories, not all of them. And like the cases of the war and the stuff that we experienced, that was obviously a major, their surroundings were changing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not always linked to just the ghost itself. So I honestly don't know if it is ghost related. Shit. I thought I was on a roll and I'm not. I lost my thought.
No. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think it's ghosts. To me, it doesn't seem like that's what's happening, because think about a residual haunting. When you see a residual haunting or even hear a residual haunting, you experience just seeing them in your space doing the thing that they were doing in the past. So that's all a residual is.
And it's like in a time slip, could you die? Could those guys who were getting bombed have died? Or were they immune and just like having the most intense thing where shit was exploding all around them and they just kept running? Like, I need to know more details.
Well, let's go back to Nuremberg, because in the Nuremberg, there were fires that happened. So in their time slip... Yeah, there was effect.
It kind of seemed like their bottom half of the world, no one described that changing. It was only what was in the air. So it was almost like those ships themselves were time slipping. So it seems like, ooh, yourself and your vehicle, they went back to ancient Nuremberg, Germany. So they were the time slip people in that case, potentially, if it wasn't aliens.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to think about. So, I mean, yeah, and they could be...
Because who's time slipping? This is where I'm getting so confused.
Right, who's time slipping? So I wrote down, my theory was, I wrote down, from that song, Time Keeps on Slipping into the Future.
Oh, yes, Miller, baby.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah. So it's kind of like when you're thinking about it, I came across this theory. Somebody said time slips are like, let's say you're in your home and you're walking from one room into the next. That's what time is. So you're just walking from one time period into the next. So basically, like in your story, in the story of Versailles, they took one step and were into the future without feeling like there was a difference at first.
Or the past, right?
Or the past, yeah, whichever. So they just took a step into a different room real quick.
What if just like the mere wrong step and you're somehow walking backward in time?
I mean, I think that there has to be a catalyst to make it happen.
Yeah. What's the catalyst? Because
I did come across something about that.
Good. What is it?
Ley lines.
Of course.
So,
of course.
When it comes to ley lines, the veil is thinner in these areas. And that kind of leads things to, or time to kind of dissipate and maybe blend together or bleed together in some way. So I was like, I looked up Drum airfield, and it is only 20 miles away from Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is on a ley line.
All right. How many times does that place come up when we're looking up paranormal? All the time.
A lot. And there's been a bunch of time slips, more than one, in Liverpool. And Liverpool is 30 miles away from Manchester, which is on a ley line.
So once again, our whole podcast could be summarized to ley lines.
Yeah. So
damn it.
Maybe they're portals through time.
It's all that energy. Let's say I always forget how to explain ley lines, but it just seems like it's like intuitive. They're just like these weird lines that have energy. It's some sort of like mystical cosmic force. They amplify the paranormal. They amplify oddities. They amplify UFO activities, all that kind of stuff. And I would even say the occult, because like in some ley lines, it's like, oh, well, that's where pagan rituals are going on, and that's where Stonehenge is, or that's where ancient Egypt's pyramids are. Like, so much is just on this grid of the paranormal. Is that like where we were born, on some grid of the paranormal? That's why we're weirdos?
Yes, that's why we're weirdos.
We need to look at the ley lines of the hospitals here.
I'm all Oregon ley lines.
I know. We actually try this a lot, and it's kind of hard to find ley line maps.
It is. Yeah. I mean, like, it's hard to find ones that are valid. Like, I will find tons that it's like people have made up. There's all these different forms of ley lines. And I know we've had an episode about them before, but I feel like, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. What was that?
That was my dog. So I think the thing with ley lines when we're looking them up is it's easy to find maps that other people have created, but really the ley line is an energetic line, and we can't just create that. It's already there. It's kind of this unseen lines that are already there.
One day I will have a corkboard map with ley lines and strings.
Yes, me too. Let's have one together.
I need a Cousin's Coven corkboard where, I'm just like, what are we working on this week, and where are the ley lines? Because it's just like rookie mistake not bringing up ley lines. Like, I've just completely disregarded them because they're always relevant to where it becomes redundant. But it's like, damn it explains it all.
Right. I'm like, ley line.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of psychic powers too, because in my story, he could have just been getting a glimpse of the future. So let's say the reality is he didn't interact with anybody, then he could psychically be seeing something from the future. And
lesbians are apparently time travelers. So if you're psychic or a lesbian, you can do this.
Yeah.
You can be a Time Lord.
Lord. Did you have any other ideas that it could possibly be?
There wasn't anything that I could think of on my own or even came across. I'm kind of just going to chalk it up to everything we've talked about, really. I can't even scope it. It's just like the world and the paranormal is too big for me to even understand. That's what I know, and that's what I'm comfortable with knowing many times. So I really can't even think of another theory. Right.
So what do you think about the pictures that people have found? Do you think they're just coincidence? Do you think
I love looking at them. That is one clickbait thing that'll get me. I am so good at not looking at celebrities. What do they look like now, or blah, blah, blah. But like, if you see like time traveler, views decide, I'd be like, click. Like, I just need to look. So if you have any that I should look up, I totally will. But I love looking at them, and I just find them amusing and fun. Like the time traveling celebrity photos where like Daniel Radcliffe is just in every period as an old woman with glasses. I love that stuff. But I don't know if I've ever seen any that's like really freaked me out or convinced me.
Gotcha. So there's some old Charlie Chaplin video, like black and white, where there's no sound, and there's a woman who's walking, and it looks like she's talking on a phone.
Let me find it, because I need to look at it. I only read about it, but tell me.
Okay. So there is a theory that what she's actually... I'm sorry, I just bumped my microphone. There's a theory that what she's actually doing is talking into a microphone and not a phone. And I was like, but it actually looks like that. Or there's this old-timey photo where somebody, like, it's a carving or a painting, something that was done over 100 years ago, and there was a laptop in it.
Let's discuss this Chaplin one really quick, because I had heard that she was using an early hearing aid device. Does that even exist at this time period? I don't even know. She's like holding something. How is that a hearing aid? If a hearing aid was a cell phone.
Right. So the first hearing aids came about in the 17th century. So it would be in the 1600s. But those were like those ear trumpets, and they used those ear trumpets up until like the 1900s.
The thing is, the lady is holding. I'm going to link this down below in the show notes so that you can watch
Okay.
with me, guys. But she's
Yeah.
walking behind a zebra, not a real one, and she just has her hands cuffed like there's a phone. Like, I can't think of any other reason why she'd have her hand clawed and cuffed over her ear.
Right. And what year was that? Do you know? Does it say?
No, but if we try to figure out what movie this is,
Okay.
let's figure out.
So I will tell you from 1920 to 1950, they did have strange devices that you would either cup up to your ear or with some sort of strange headphone, old headphone that would go into your ear. And you would have this kind of phone, almost looking transistor, but it was from 1920 to 1950.
This was built, okay, sorry, not built. This was premiered 1928, and I found a link that's claiming to debunk it. I'm going to look it over to see if this answers
Okay.
all of life's questions.
Right. Okay. So I guess, I mean, it could be possible that she had an old hearing device.
Oh, that's all they're saying. Yeah, they're like, it's just a primitive hearing trumpet. Here's a photo of an ear trumpet. And I don't even see the photo. I see. Oh,
Gotcha.
it's just the ear trumpet like you were talking about. It kind of just looks like a
Mhm.
weird cigar trumpet. But no one's talking to her. It looks like a hearing aid trumpet is literally something that you would use if you were in conversation. She's not walking next to anyone. She's not holding something
Right.
to the side of her head. She's cradling something to her ear. The way you would hold an ear trumpet, to me, doesn't look like that. But it could be
Right.
wrong. I could be wrong.
I mean, they had kind of, like, if you look at Wikipedia at hearing aids, just do a quick search for that.
What if I
And
look up hearing
then-
aid trumpet? Oh, yeah.
But what I was looking at was totally different. I looked at the history of the hearing aid, and what I came up with, I'm sorry, I'm typing. Hopefully that's not annoying.
Yeah, they're getting a lot of research ASMR, guys, this episode.
So if you look up history of hearing aids, and there is digital hearing aids, those are the ones that I'm talking about. So those started, the German hearing aids date from around 1920 to 1950, and they have pictures. They have pictures on the right-hand side of the screen. I don't know if you can see that. So like they'll show pictures of an ear trumpet, and then they go all the way down to these vacuum tube hearing aids. And they're just basically radio for your ears.
I don't see what you're seeing, but it's probably here. I'm just not noticing it. But
Gotcha.
So you're saying that they had compact, small ones like this back in the day?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it's definitely not the trumpet one, because when I looked up just the trumpet, they're literally holding up a trumpet to their damned ear and pointing it towards someone's face.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm going to post.
Link it.
Post it. Yeah, I've got the link on our doc, so we'll post that on.
I'm going to link this Charlie Chaplin lady. I know you guys need to see. So stuff like that I find entertaining because it's just like a fun debate that spices up the office. You know what I mean? Is she a time traveler? And then you get to see where people's lie. Are you a paranormal minded? Can I chit chat with you about other stuff? This is just like a gateway for me to figure out how other people view the paranormal.
Right.
So I'm loving it. That's pretty much the main one I saw too. Was there another one that kind of jumps out at you that people always say?
Well, there's this picture of this dude who looks like he's in 1990s clothing, like maybe from 1994. He looks like a hipster.
And he's like on a boat?
No, he's not on a boat. He's in the middle of like this kind of hipster. I'm just going to hipster time traveler. That's what I'm going to type in. Hipster time traveler. If you type that up,
that sounds like a really good look to serve. Like, I just want to look like a hipster time traveler.
Yeah. So he's got these
cool
black glasses. Yeah. And they call him the time traveling hipster. But for that time period, would somebody have been wearing, because I think this was the 1920s. So would somebody have been wearing a funky old sweater with weird glasses and
he stands out.
T-shirt?
He does stand out.
A logo T-shirt.
So like when I looked at it, they debunk it right away. They link it to like some sort of lacrosse jersey, and that you can see everyone in the time period wearing that. So he's like some sort of like I think it's a lacrosse or some sort of field hockey.
Mm-hmm.
That's the team that the jersey comes from, and apparently those glasses are of the period too. But he is like a young man who's amid a bunch of old people in these old fuddy-duddy hats. Like they all look like they're shadow people hats, basically.
Right. And he's got a cool camera and everything.
This is just what it looks like when young persons stand next to a bunch of old people. They look like a time traveler.
Right. So they do say, like, if you look at the history of the T-shirt, because I was like, well, when did we start actually having logos with T-shirts on them?
Yeah.
And apparently that did start happening in the early 1900s, but usually for a uniform. So I was like, is he just in his work uniform, his work attire?
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like he has like a hoodie on. It looks like he has a hoodie.
Like over the lacrosse M jersey.
Yeah. Like either he's just really fucking stylish or this is proof that he time traveled.
So it says his T-shirt is the logo of the Montreal Maroons, which is a hockey team. Oh, hockey. The glasses with the protective shields were available in the 1940s. It was not widespread, but it is plausible that he has them.
Okay.
Then, let's see. The final nail in the time traveler's coffin comes to us courtesy of Kodak. Many viewers assumed that the camera that the man is holding is too small, but they did have these cameras available in 1941. So I can't see anything about a hoodie, but they're trying to debunk the camera, the glasses, and the hockey jersey. I mean, so I don't know. I think that that's what the internet will do. It'll always nitpick and debunk.
Right. But do they do it out of good purposes because they want people to know the truth, or are they fucking trying to cover it up?
At least that last one I felt like seemed pretty legit. Like they had graphic evidence and timestamps of the items.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
That's just funny. Like I wonder if we'd ever look like time travelers in our fashions. Like I had 90s hand-me-downs. Would I look like a time traveler?
Right.
It's just when you're really out of fashion or are really ahead of the fashion. You have too much fashion.
Right.
But the digital devices, that's pretty cool. Mobile phones.
Yeah, mobile phones.
Because I think there's a lot of those circulating the internet.
Right. And there are people who said that they have time traveled before. I know that there is this guy, this kid, actually. I wish I should have wrote his name down. He's a man now. That's why I call him a guy. But at the time, he was a child, and his father worked for the government. And he said that they were doing time travel testing, and they used him to travel back in time. And so he is in random photos throughout history because he was time traveling.
That's weird.
Mm-hmm. And so he claims it was times, that sometimes when he would time travel, he didn't really have clothes. So he had to find stuff. I was like, why can't you time travel with clothes? But I think there was...
That's just like Terminator. It's true. James Cameron, you're so smart.
Yeah. So...
the internet is full of weird stuff. Like, I think I just found one that's probably fake, but I'm going to tell it anyway. This person saying time travel is real because there was an ancient watch that was discovered in a tomb in China. The tomb was undisturbed for 400 years. And there was a tiny, tiny watch. Like the guy holding it, it looks like he's holding like a toy watch almost. It's like made out of clay with all these details. It's like a tiny Timex. Mm-hmm. And the hand is pointed at 10:06. And the watch is said to be more than 100 years old. And they're saying, how could a 100-year-old watch be embedded in this tomb dating back to the Ming Dynasty. And then that's the end of the article with a picture of it. So I'm kind of like, this has to be like an art installation.
Right.
I need more information.
Right. You're like, come on, more. I think I've seen that before too. Or like there's, they found some old footprint, like millions and millions of years old footprint, and it has the same tread as a tennis shoe.
Oh, I think I've heard of that one too.
Yeah.
And there was a reason for it, right? They try to debunk it, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you remember the Solway Firth spaceman photo? Have you seen that one?
Wait, no.
Okay. So I'm going to see if I can get a link for that so you can see it really quick.
Okay, I've got this up.
All right. So you'll see the picture. It's a little girl. There, she's out having a picnic with her family, and her dad snaps a photo, and they go back and they get it. They get the film developed, and they see a spaceman
Where is he? I don't
in the
see
photo
him.
with her.
Is he this thing up in the top right corner?
Yeah, not the the twig,
Oh,
but the
that's
white behind her head.
That kind of just looks like the back of a man's head to
Yeah.
me.
No, he's in a space uniform.
I mean, it's
That's
so
what everybody
blurry.
always believes.
I could see what they're seeing, but I could also be like, it's just really blurry. You can't make it out. So what's the legend?
So they didn't see it when they took the photo. They didn't see it, and so there was always this controversy of, was there something blipping in through time, something from the future just kind of blipped in? Was there issue with the film like itself? Like, did something happen with the film? But they tested the photo and it wasn't photoshopped. It's not a hoax. None of that. They didn't think that it was overexposed.
So basically the family was like, no one was behind my daughter. No one was there.
Right. No one was there. But a lot of people, like when the photo is larger, I'm sorry that this is kind of not the greatest photo. There are other ones out there that are a lot better. Oh, here, maybe I'll give you this one on good old Wikipedia.
Spaceman, Wikipedia, yeah.
Yeah. Here, we'll try this one.
It's more spacesuity, but yeah.
But it could also be like a guy in a bee suit.
Oh yeah, because the way his elbow's bent, that's the back of the head.
Right.
That's
the
not
back of the
that's
head.
not a helmet.
Right. But what could it possibly be? But nobody saw him there, and that's why they believe that potentially paranormal experts believe that it could be somebody who just blipped in really quick and then blipped out.
Yeah. So basically there's a lot of evidence for time slips, but all the evidence, people are going to find a million reasons to debunk it, you know?
Right.
Including myself at times, like with this last photo, I'll be like, but it's just a head.
Right.
It's really something that sounds like a personal experience. Again, that the paranormal, we always talk about how it is very personal. So I don't know. I kind of believe people when they say they experience these things where like maybe couples just go stay at a hotel that's like super old, doesn't have windows, and it only costs £2. They go back, they try to go back 6 months later, that place doesn't exist. Like that's a story I read before we went on air, and it's like, yeah, I believe that cute, quaint couple went through that. I don't discredit their time slips. So at the end of the day, I'm kind of going to say I believe in people's stories, and I enjoy them. I find this to be a fun topic. What about you? What are your thoughts?
I'm a believer. Whether we'll find out what it really is in our lifetime, I'm not sure, but I do think that these things are happening to people.
Would you say you would be open to a time slip or not? Experience when going
I mean,
through
I've
it.
experienced them. So not that I was open to it or even really knew that they existed till it happened. So for me, I would experience it again as long as it was in a positive mindset, a positive mind.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I do think that ley lines might have something to do with bringing about some sort of extra paranormal energy. And I definitely think that anybody who is psychic could experience some sort of time slip. And I do think it might have something to do with consciousness and openness of consciousness.
Yeah, that's well said. I agree with that statement. I don't think that just anyone could be open to doing it, but you never know how the universe works and who it's going to pull in and show stuff to. Sometimes it does show itself to the most skeptic person and convert them. So, yeah. Yay. I'd enjoyed today's discussion on time slips. I think it's something that I would be down to tackle again in the future, just time travel in general from another angle and go from there. There's just so much to say about the possibilities of it all. And the numerous cases, honestly. I'll probably figure out some more cases and then just want to come talk about it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess we'll wrap it up for today.
Yeah. Join us on the other side where we're going to have another discussion on Patreon.
Yes, we'll be continuing the conversation in our after show right after this, but you can always catch us for our regular episodes every Wednesday. You can find season 1 over at cousinscoven.home.blog for all of our original episodes, to sign up for our newsletter and to read some blog articles. Check us out over there. Send in any emails to cousinscoven2@gmail.com. We love hearing from you guys, and if you're interested in our Patreon and the after show, links will be down below.
And may you find happiness in your heart, love for yourself, and join each other. Blessings to all.